It's easy to think that all USB-C cables are the same and that any differences manufacturers claim are just a way to jack up the price. After all, it's Guy. As you can see, this is completely understandable, but not always accurate. Here at PC World, we've tested a ton of USB-C cables, and we can say with certainty not all of them are made the same. In fact, we noticed huge performance differences among cables when it comes to both charging devices and transferring data. But with so many options available, how do you know which USB-C cables are the best? To find out, we tested a bunch of cables ranging from the biggest, most recognizable brand names to the cheapest of the cheap and put them through the ringer to see which came out on top. We've highlighted the winners below. Our picks are separated into two groups to avoid any confusion. USB-C cables that are best for charging, and those best for both charging and fast data transfer. For your more information, you can refer to our guide on how to buy a USB-C cable on Amazon without losing your mind, and you can find out more about how we test cables below our picks. Let's be honest, most people don't need a USB-C to USB-C cable for much more than charging devices. So why the premium for all that high-speed data transfer, Thunderbolt stuff? Look at no further than the Amazon Basics aluminum braided 100-watt USB-C to USB-C 2.0 cable. Then, before you get too excited, the aluminum in its name probably should be aluminum colored. The other second was a whole positive if you want Xtuner be in place, a climate field, and when you wanted a matter for a WFIT, been headed a force build and wired strictly for USB 2.0 data transfer speeds. That means you should expect no more than 480 Mbps versus the much faster 5 gigabits to 40 gigabits per second of cables model of the CAN. The good news is that as a charging cable, you'll be able to charge up to 100 watts, enough power for a Dell XPS 15 or MacBook Pro 16 class laptop. Although our testing didn't find it to be quite as good as the JVX cable, we're bumping from our top perch. It's close enough it doesn't matter. During testing, we also subjected the Amazon Basics aluminum braided cable to a continuous 100-watt load for more than 30 minutes without issue, so charging won't be a problem. Even better, it's less than half the cost of today's charging cable we previously recommended for those on a budget. Sure, it's not quite as pliable as the even more basic Amazon Basics cable USB 3 to USB-C below. This one is currently cheaper. It's limited to 60 watts. It doesn't feel like it will fall apart. And we'll be honest, we didn't know what to expect of the stock 6-foot Apple USB-C charge cable Apple includes with its MacBook laptops and sells as a replacement item. Yes, we've heard the stories and seen the pictures of the sleeving on many Apple cables that fall off if you look at them too hard. In the end, Apple's USB-C charge cable won us over and is actually our recommended cable for those who want a big name on the box and intend to use it for mostly charging. When we say the box, we mean it because Apple oddly doesn't include any branding on the cable itself, which is a mistake because you just accept a lousy cable. In the end, though, it's what's inside a cable that matters the most, and the Apple USB-C cable has top-notch wiring materials that can deliver the most power to your laptop, phone, or tablet. Want to charge your laptop on 100 watts all day? That shouldn't be a problem for the Apple USB-C charge cable. Obviously, as a charge cable, it's terrible for data transfer and can't drive Thunderbolt devices nor your monitor, but as a charging cable, it's excellent. And another ding is its price of $19, but if you want a name brand cable, it's hard to beat this. Plus, you can buy it from an Apple store or a retailer, so you know you're actually getting what you paid for and not some counterfeit. For most people, the above cables are what you're looking for, reliable and fast charging when paired with a good power bank. For those who also want to transform a tutorial, We want to take these good charges that all of those continues to questions. If you're looking for a high quality USB-C cable that will give you excellent performance, it's hard to beat Cable and Matter 6-foot USB-C cable. The cable can do it all and do it all. Well, almost from charging it at 100 watts, transferring data from your USB 3.1 SSD or running a monitor. The only area where it doesn't excel is in Thunderbolt performance, which is limited to 20 gigabytes per second. That's not a ding in our book because that's the trade-off of a 6-foot cable. To have a step 40 gigabits per second, you have to step down to a shorter cable. It's existing and weakened coming up. It's Digitype. You built waiter at meter. It's at me first. Doesn't mean and this Savius cable we looked at above, those thicker gauge wires also mean that you can't roll up as easily or compactly as other cables too. And no surprise, high performance and high quality. I mean, it's not cheap. At $18, it's among the more expensive cables here. But if performance and quality is your jams, Cable Matters, 6-foot USB-C cable will have you humming. Cable Matters USB 3 cable is a 2.6 foot, so it lacks the appeal of long cables. What appealed to us enough to buy the cable is its USB 4 rating, which promises high performance. And no surprise, the cable was able to charge our laptop at 100 watts and offer the best voltage and lowest resistance thanks to the wires. Cable Matters uses its Sun.1 data and its 2.6 foot length that also translated into excellent USB 3.1 data transfer rates. Monitor support, and the only cable here capable of driving our Thunderbolt 3 SSD full 40 gigabytes data rates. If you're looking for high performance in all things and don't mind the length, the Cable Matters USB 4 cables are a pick. Its weaknesses are its stiff feel thanks to the higher quality, thicker wires and construction Cable Matters uses, and its price. Looked at in dollars per foot, this $20 cable is about $8 per foot. With the Amazon Basics USB 3.1 USB-C cable below, you're only paying $3.17 per foot. That Amazon cable can't match the Cable Matters USB 4 and Thunderbolt performance, but few need it. That makes the cable best suited to niche areas, but it's fast nonetheless, with excellent construction. There's a lot to like about the Amazon Basics USB 3.1 Gen 1 USB-C cable. This 6-foot cable features rubber sleeving and hefty wires that give it a substantive feel without the stiffness you get from some cables. Its Amazon Basics logo helps prevent you from mixing up this cable with the generic cables you have laying around, and the Super Speed logo assures you it's fast for the data transfers. In our testing, we were able to push the limits of our USB 3.2 10 gigabytes per second SSD. It could also drive our 240 hertz 1080p panel. It also was capable of driving further our high-performance Thunderbolt 3 drive at its 20 gigabytes per Scouser, but not at its 40 gigabytes per Scouser, which is expected of a 6-foot cable. And despite its USB 5 durable rating, we could hit 10 gigabytes per speeds anyway, which says the cable signal integrity is good despite its length. Why not label it USB 10 gigabytes per Scours? Amazon is sticking to the rules, which say a 10 gigabytes per second isn't supposed to work on a 6-foot cable. Also, oddly, Amazon specifically claims there's no alt mode support for this cable, so driving a monitor won't work. Except it does just fine, since the alt mode on USB-C just uses the wires included for the higher speed USB 3.1 data transfers to run the monitor. We could even drive our high performance Thunderbolt drive at 20 gigapoints point prints transfer rates. So what to sell yourself short, Amazon. The only real disappointment with the cable is charging is limited to 3 amps, which means it tops out at 60 watt charge rates. That's fine for a Dell XPS 13 or MacBook Pro 13, but
not enough for a Dell XPS 15 or MacBook Pro 16. In fact, that's the primary reason we didn't give the cable the former nod for best brand name cable pick.
It does carry Amazon's name, which has value to some, but at $19, it's hardly a steal. With that said, this is a fine cable, but there are indeed ones with more capability too. And compared to our picks above, we wouldn't advise purchasing any of the other USB-C cables we tested. Why settle for something inferior? But we understand some will want to see which cables didn't make the cut and why. The DockCase USB-C to USB-C cable is the worst amount you hear if you only judge a cable by length and price. In capability though, this 8.5-inch cable is one of the better performers, a consequence of its short length. The shorter the cable, the less the resistance, and well, the better the performance, even with thin wires. The DockCase advertises a 100-watt charge rate, 4K video support, and even Thunderbolt 3 support. The company doesn't mention it, but that Thunderbolt 3 speed is limited to 20 gig pips. Well, not the full 40 gig pips Thunderbolt 3 users spec, so we'll take note. It's not practical, but we have a big charger laptop at 100 watts with the DockCase. Physically, the cable is a flat design with a rubbery outer sheath. The strain relief where the cable connects to the housing is minimal as well, which makes us question its durability over time. Its length is best suited for an ultra-fast portable USB-C SSD and can pinch it for charging or running your monitor. We personally wouldn't recommend it for use with a high-speed Thunderbolt drive or device though, given its aforementioned limitations with that spec. The Amazon Basics USB-C to USB-C USB 2.0 is the cable that epitomizes minimum effort. It's 6 feet long. It will do its job to charge your phone or tablet and even your laptop at up to 60 watts, and that's about it. Since it's a USB 2.0 cable, data transfers to or from your computer will be dogged slow compared to a USB 3.1 cable. Moving a 1 gigabyte file might take a few seconds on a USB 3.1 cable and nearly a minute with the Amazon Basic USB-C charging cable. The cable itself is amazingly light, but it's probably too light, which means Amazon didn't really use the thickest wires it could for this cable. That shows up with some of the highest resistance among the cables. 6 feet or longer in this roundup, meaning less power delivered to your phone or tablet. And so granted, we're talking about 2% lower wattage compared to the best of the longer cables here. But still, that's like a school report card that says present as its main selling point. It's not all bad for the Amazon Basics cable. It does carry a big name brand, and its lack of wires to support higher speed USB 3.1 makes it relatively thin and light and very pliable. Would we use this cable to charge our laptop every day? Probably not. But for someone charging a phone or tablet, its lightweight feel can be a plus. This is Anker's oldest Powerline cable, but it's still available alongside the Powerline 2 and Powerline 3 models. As its name tells you, this version is a USB 2.0, maybe the Fortel or 80 megabit cable. Transferring large files to your phone or tablet from your computer will be tedious at best. It has a black plastic sleeve without the tacky, rubbery feel some cables have on the inside. It's about average with actual charging performance, somewhat better than the Amazon for the Need It. Basics USB 2.0 cable, but not in the class of the JVX cable, which supports charge rates up to 100 watts instead of the Powerline 60 watts. Phones, tablets, and late-duty laptops are its best use cases. Unfortunately, while it's a decent cable for certain uses, its pricing hurts it. And its typical pricing of $12, it's not worth it. We've seen it more recently for $8, which makes it slightly more attractive, but even at that price, we recommend you buy the JVX instead. You get what you pay for. USB-C-SC to USB-C cable kind of proves the old adage. It says, if the price is low, there's a reason for it. Not only do you get a 6.6 foot 2-meter USB-C to USB-C cable in the box, you get 2 of them for what other brands might charge us for just 1 cable. Unlike some lesser known cables on Amazon, the JSOX cables are at least properly marketed with warnings that it is not a Thunderbolt 3 cable. It cannot output video, and its charge rate is limited to 60 watts, with data limited to a very slow 480 megabytes. That's essentially a basic USB-C charging cable, and not the greatest one. Note that the internal resistance of the cable itself is found to be pretty mediocre. In fact, we haven't seen a USB-C to USB-C cable with resistance that has its space on less resistance but more valuable. And I think that's reflected in more than 31,000 reviews of this top-selling cable with most of it positive from around the world. We pass for a slightly pricier cable and would even prefer the Amazon Basics cable to it. But we do recognize that for charging a smartphone and tablet, it'll probably be fine, which explains how there are 31,000 happy customers. There are, however, better choices out there for those willing to pay for it. And for this roundup, we purchased retail USB-C cables for our testing. We physically measured and weighed each cable and examined each connector. A proper USB-C cable should use a one-piece shell rather than a folded shell with a visible seam in it. None of the cables we purchased use the lower strength folded shells. We do want to point out that weight does tend to matter. All cables are essentially tiny metallic wire strands bound together with insulation. Sure, the connector, housing, braiding, and outer shell all factors in its weight. The lighter duty cables literally have fewer wires and are far lighter. For example, the Cable Matters High Performance USB 4 cable is a 32 inches long and weighs more than the Amazon Basics Low Performance USB 2.0 cable, which is more than twice as long. It's not always better though. As a cable with more wires that are a heavier gauge or thicker are less pliable and also take up more space in your bag. You'd think you could tell whether a cable is USB-C 2.0 cable by looking at the wires in the connector, but that's not the case. Some cables use connectors on the wires here out of the case. Seems only one day. To check each cable, we use a BitTrade 1 USB cable checker 2.0 to first see what actual wires are inside of the cable and whether they are hooked up correctly and what they do. For example, a USB-C cable that is fine for charging, but a dog and data transfer will show up, is being wired only for USB-C 2.0, as you can see below by the green LEDs. The CC LED indicates the cable configuration channel is wired up correctly, and a full-featured USB-C cable has additional wires to carry higher speed data, and the USB Cable Checker 2.0 shows this Cable Matters USB 4 cable in the picture below with the correct wiring all available. The small LED display also tells us that the cable has an IDE marker chip. The shell is properly grounded to the cable, and it does a quick resistance test too. The cable tester also checks to see if the metal shell of the cable is grounded to the ground wire of the cable, which is required by spec. Every cable here was properly grounded. The resistance check from our cable checker is quick and dirty, so we augmented that by also measuring the resistance of the cable's ground wire and V-bus wire using a milliohm meter connected via a pair of USB-C breakout boards The breakout boards at both ends add about 30 mohms to the total. By spec, a USB-C cable should not exceed 83 mohms on the ground wires and 167 mohms on the voltage bus. Many of the cables that we tested were within spec or close enough that it didn't matter. Since there's likely even more resistance we're not able to account for with our method, we definitely could tell which cables used heavier gauge or thick wires with less resistance to restrict the flow of electricity and which ones cheaped out. I would say, and since each of the more advanced cables carries an E-marker that tells the computer what the cable can do, we noted that and the validity of the E-marker's claims.
All but one of the cables met those claims, but the one that was wrong was way, way wrong. It claimed USB 3.2 10G BPS transfer speeds and 1 meter length when it literally didn't have the wires for the faster transfer speeds and was actually 2 meters long.
We then looked at how fast the cable would charge and transfer data and whether it supported an alternate mode to run a monitor using real-world hardware. For charging speeds, we recorded the maximum wattage at which the cable could charge an Asus ROG Strix 15 gaming laptop over its USB-C port using USB power delivery with an AKI 100-watt USB PD charger as the source while the laptop was under load. USB PD today is limited to 100 watts with a 240-watt spec on the way. A USB-C to USB-C cable should handle 3 amps at 20 volts or 60 watts. All of the USB-C to USB-C cables fell into the standard 60 watt or 100 watt. We didn't test the temperature of each cable's housing, but we did test the cheapest cable by running it at 5 amps and 20 volts for an hour. The housing heated up by 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and the cable itself became relatively warm, and see the thermal image below. Not ideal, but it did this without failure. We subjected other cables to 2-hour loads without failure as well. For one final charge test, we tasked each cable with a 20 volt 3 amp and 20 volt 5 amp load for the 5 amp rated cables and measured the voltage delivered at the end of the cable using our CT3 meter. And the cables with the thinnest gauge wires add more resistance, which in turn reduces the voltage delivered to your laptop, tablet, or phone. For data transfer, we measured the speed using Crystal Disk Mark 8 while plugged into the USB-C Thunderbolt 4 port of an MSI Prestige 14 Evo laptop. Since the cables and it can also be used to transfer data from a Thunderbolt storage drive, we measured how fast that happened using a high-speed SSD-based SanDisk Professional Thunderbolt G drive. We found 3 transfer modes among the cables tested: Thunderbolt 20 gig cables performance, Thunderbolt 40 gigabytes performance, or 0 performance, because the cable would not work at all with the Thunderbolt drive. Our last test looked at each cable's capability running an Asus ROG Strix 17.3-inch portable gaming monitor. The monitor is a high-performance gaming monitor with a resolution of 1920, 1080, and refresh rate of 240 hertz, which is basically the same bandwidth requirements of a standard 4K 60 hertz display. There are a number of different types of USB-C to USB-C cables, including USB 2.0, USB 3.1 Gen 1, USB 3.1 Gen 2, and Thunderbolt 4. The main difference between all of these is their data transfer rates and their charge rates. Basic charge cables give you very slow data transfer speeds and typically only let you up to 60 watts. And for a phone, tablet, and even most small laptops such as Dell XPS 13 or MacBook Pro 13, that's fine. As you move up to larger laptops such as a Dell XPS 15 or MacBook Pro 16, 60 watts will limit how fast you can charge. The other key differentiator is speed. USB 2.0 is applauding 480 megabits per second. USB 3 cables range from 5 gigabits per second to 20 gigabits per second, while USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 can support up to 40 gigabits for throughput. Thunderbolt, USB 4, and mini USB 3 cables also support display support. Using DisplayPort and USB-C cables today are used for transferring data, running monitors, and charging everything on the planet from $5 LED trinkets to $2,000 laptops and even power tools now is basically the most common type of cable for electronics today. And thanks to its universal and open design, and has rapidly replaced all other competitors, including Apple's Lightning, and as well as older USB cables. Its appeal is the reversible nature, so you no longer have to look for alignment. With its ability to handle 240 watts now, USB-C to USB-C cables will likely begin replacing other proprietary cables as well. There are a few key differences between the two. A USB-C to USB-A cable has a rectangular connector on side with 4 to 9 pins in it. As you know from trying to plug the mouse into your PC, it only fits in one way, and you usually never get it right the first time. On the other ends of a USB-C to USB-A cable, you will find the modern oval USB-C connector, which fits in both ways and packs far more pins and wires inside. The short story is that a Type A to Type C cable will typically charge at much slower speeds than a Type C to Type C cable, as well as transfer data at far lower data rates. That isn't always the case, as some phones that use special Type A to Type C chargers and cables will indeed charge very fast, but they're usually proprietary. With most new phones just going to USB Type C, you're probably going to